Thanks to the tech team. Give them a round of applause. I'm Hoylman-Sigal, and welcome to our on civil rights in New York. We're going to be talking about voting rights, abortion rights, and LGBTQ rights during this incredibly consequential period for our state, our nation, and our city. I'm State Senator Brad Hoylman-Sigal, very proud to represent you from Christopher Street to West 103rd. Thank you very much. My keynotes to say, from the gay bars to Zay bars. That's our slogan. And I'm very grateful for you to be here today to spend your Friday afternoon here. And before we get started, I do wanted to thank the team, in addition to the tech team up there, Sam Vasquez Martinez, Jonah Rose, Caroline Wexelbaum, Evan Lieberman, Jake Asher, Esther Caroline, John Weinberg, Megan Nolasco, John Houston, Stephanie Schettino, Ben Platt, and Katie Moore. Can we give them a round of applause? And our elected colleagues who are co-sponsoring this event, including Congressman Jerry Nadler, Assembly members Tony Simone, thank you, Linda Rosenthal, and Councilmember Gail Brewer. And I want to thank the amazing team here at the West Side Y for having us here in this beautiful arts and craft theater called the Marjorie S. Dean Theater. Catherine, Mike, and Sharon, give them a round of applause. Over Zoom. So a special hello to everyone joining us virtually. I don't know about you, but I'm sure you agree that everyone's head is spinning since November. And the sweep of the House and the Senate and the presidency, as well as the courts leaning different directions, has made it very difficult for so many people in our communities. We know that the most recent federal elections were, in effect, won on hate, fear, and division, and sadly that worked. And the message in the campaign and the follow-through seems to be most about targeting the most vulnerable in our communities, whether it's trans kids who want nothing more to have the freedom to live their lives as themselves, immigrants who came to our country hoping to find a better life, and anyone who is facing a shortfall in their pocketbook. This is truly an unspeakable travesty for so many people. And just the first 2 months of the Trump administration, they have followed through on their campaign promises to attack the civil rights of those who don't agree with them. We've seen executive orders attempting to end birthright citizenship, erase trans people from existence, stop gender-affirming care, and completely ignore the rule of law. Fortunately, many of these policies have been temporarily halted, at least by federal judges, but that certainly doesn't mean we can be complacent. We know that the federal administration is looking to restrict abortion access, disenfranchise voters, and roll back the progress we've made on a whole host of human rights. Luckily, we have strong civil rights protections at the state level here in New York, both through our state laws and our state constitution, including the new Proposal 1 that you helped pass in November. And I wanted you to know that we're doing everything we can in Albany to Trump-proof our state. Last week, I wanted you to know I filed an attorney grievance against U.S. Deputy Attorney General Emil Bo, stating that he violated the attorney rules of professional conduct by directing the dismissal of the indictment against Eric Adams as what would appear to be a quid pro quo. Emil Bo is registered as an attorney in New York State. Maybe not for much longer. The governor signed a bill that I co-sponsored that protects doctors who prescribe the abortion pill, which will allow the physicians to omit their names from the prescription so they won't be unfairly prosecuted. Advancing money in the state budget for legal representation for indigent, undocumented New Yorkers facing deportation through a bill that we've called the Access to Representation Act. Imagine going before an immigration attorney, not knowing the law, but worse, when English isn't even your first language, and even more perilous is not having an attorney present. That's the situation for most undocumented New Yorkers. So we're going to try to make sure they all get lawyers. I've introduced a bill which we've called the Registry for Keeping Justified Records Act. Now, if you put that acronym together, it spells out RFK Jr. I couldn't resist. And it's going to require the recording of adult vaccinations. The reason that's important is not so the government can track you by any means. It's so that your doctor knows whether you've had a vaccine or not and whether you need a booster. And I don't know about you, but when I've stepped on something and have to go for a tetanus shot, the doctor says, "When did you get your last tetanus shot?" My answer is, I have no idea. This will make that uniform, as it is in more than half the states in the US, including Florida, where I did step on a rusty nail and they told me they had that law. Fifth, we're extending our Trans Shield bill to include protections for transgender health care providers, including medical providers, social workers, and other professionals, so they can avoid prosecution from other states. We're increasing the New York State Attorney General's budget by over $8 million to help her litigate against the Trump administration and defend New York against the tax war. And then seventh, I want you to know that I'm working on an amicus brief right now with the MTA to defend congestion pricing. Ideas welcome. We need to act collectively as a community. So if you have an idea how we can, in New York State, stand up to Trump, please let me or one of my colleagues know. So now we're going to turn to our first speaker. We're going to hear from a number of speakers today. We're going to hear from Perry Grossman from the New York Civil Liberties Union to talk about voting rights. We're going to hear from Mariam Mohammed Miller from Planned Parenthood of Greater New York to talk about the future of reproductive rights. And first, we're going to have Whit Washington from the Non-Binary and Transgender Rights Project to talk about the latest in the fight to protect LGBTQ rights. And finally, we're going to take questions from the floor, so you can ask our expert panelists yourself. Try to keep your questions to the topics we're discussing today. My audience is going to be passing around the microphones. Because of time constraints, we may not get every single question answered, but we're going to be here to answer them even after the event. And you can always email or call us, Hoylman@nyclU.gov, and hopefully we can get back to you as soon as possible. So without further ado, let's get right to it. Our first speaker, who is waiting in the wings off to my right, is a representative of the Transgender Legal Defense Fund. Please welcome Whit Washington, the Eileen A. Ryan Senior Attorney for the Non-Binary and Transgender Rights Project, part of Lambda Legal. Welcome, Whit. Whit is the founder of the Project for Transgender and Community Survivors, which has aimed to expand access to justice for trans people in custody, and a former attorney at the Miss Major Alexander L. Lee TGIJP Black Trans Cultural Center. Welcome.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for that warm welcome. My name is Whit Washington. As the senator mentioned, I am Dr. Eileen Ryan, senior attorney for the Non-Binary and Transgender Rights Project at Lambda Legal. I come to Lambda Legal after many years of fighting on behalf of the most marginalized folks in our society, specifically transgender folks. And I've also advocated on behalf of incarcerated individuals in DC through the Public Defender Service. I wanted to take a moment because it's not lost on me the moment that we have come to and the progress that we have made for me to stand in front of you today. I am a Black, biracial, trans, and queer attorney. Interracial relationships were criminalized until the 60s. Transgender people are still criminalized to an extent, and we see more criminal laws popping up around the country. And LGBTQ individuals have historically been criminalized all the way up until 2003. There has been progress for me to stand before you today. And so while I have a lot of bad news, unfortunately, to share with you, I think it's important that we do take an opportunity to remind ourselves that we have made some progress. I think it's especially important to think about and acknowledge the folks who came before me, specifically Polly Murray, whose legal theories and ideas were the foundation of Thurgood Marshall's arguments in Brown v. Board, and Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg's arguments in Reed v. Reed, which addressed equal protection based on gender. I think it's also important to acknowledge Bayard Rustin, another LGBTQ Black individual whose legal theories and legal ideas were forced to sort of take a back seat on account of he was a queer individual, and the movement felt that it was not helpful to have a queer individual at the forefront. So I stand before you today, like I said, about to share horrible news, but I would like to take a moment to celebrate the progress that we have made as a country in order for me to stand before you today. So I'm gonna use my... Or not. Okay, there we go. So the agenda for today, I just did my introduction. I'll talk a bit about what has changed, as I mentioned. I'll talk a bit about what community and allies can do in order to continue the fight and move forward for folks who sometimes may feel that they do not have any power in order to make change. And then we'll just have some final thoughts and open it up to questions. So what has changed for LGBTQ rights since the election? It's become horrible. Oh no. Yeah, but we've heard a lot about the executive orders, especially that have specifically targeted transgender individuals. While the executive orders, the strength that they have in terms of like their legal power is unknown, what we've seen is that the freeze that it has caused, the chilling effects that it has had on individuals in different sectors has actually been the greatest problem. We have seen doctors no longer be willing to provide gender-affirming care to trans youth. And for individuals who are not familiar, gender-affirming care for trans youth is incredibly important. For individuals whose gender identity is not accepted and supported, the rate for self-harm actually increases from about 3% for individuals whose gender is affirmed, all the way up to about 30% for individuals whose gender is not affirmed. So when we talk about gender-affirming care, we are talking about the lives of people. It's not just it's not just access to medication, there really is an impact. And for the government to pass laws that hinder access to that type of care, to me, suggests that there is a intent for the government to erase people from our society. We have also seen that there have been some shifts in the various federal agencies. There has been a reversal of support for LGBTQ individuals. Specifically, one that worries me the most is the rescinding of regulations from the Bureau of Prisons, the Federal Bureau of Prisons. So transgender individuals will no longer be housed based on gender identity. For those who are not familiar, transgender individuals in custody are about 12 times more likely to be sexually assaulted in custody than cisgender individuals. Transgender individuals are also more likely to be arrested than cisgender individuals. So the government is creating a space in which discrimination is accepted, in which violence against transgender individuals is allowed, in which the criminalization of trans folks and their allies is a foundational post of the government. And it's really creating a very violent and unsafe situation. In addition to the regulations, the executive orders, there are 43 current vacancies in the federal judiciary, with an additional 10 vacancies announced. In his first term, Trump appointed 226 Article 3 federal judges, including 54 appellate judges, which means that individuals who align. Ooh, the microphone did not like that either. I'll just do this. Which means that as we bring challenges and claims to the constitutionality of these efforts to discriminate against transgender individuals and LGBTQ folks, we come up against judges whose ideology is not in support of our reality. So it not only means that there are more laws to fight against, but it makes it more difficult to fight against the laws in an equitable way. In addition to the judges that are coming up, we have a few important key Supreme Court cases. And as you all know, the Supreme Court is, it is what it is. The United States v. Scrimetti. It's a challenging of the constitutionality of a Tennessee law banning gender-affirming care for folks under 18. And Muhammad v. Taylor, Maryland parents are challenging the inclusion of LGBTQ-themed storybooks because they do not want their kids to learn about LGBTQ individuals. It's a religious freedom case. And we also have Besant v. Dellinger, which examines the executive branch's authority to remove independent agency officials. So we're talking about the rights of people to access medically necessary care. We're talking about the state allowing religious freedoms to impede on the freedom of expression of individuals and the rights of individuals to live their lives as they see fit. And we're also seeing an opportunity for power to be consolidated in the executive branch. Again, terrifying. When we have cases like this and they set bad precedent, we often come against jurisprudence that creates barriers to civic engagement and full citizenship, the erosion of legal protections, and the expansion of discrimination under religious freedom. In the United States, we are supposed to exist in a country where our individual safety and security is not hindered because of another person's religion, and that's really being tested. So that is that's the bad news, unfortunately. I think what I do want to talk about though is the hope. So I just told you about the horrible things that are happening on the federal level. On the state level, it's not super going much better. There are upwards of 600, there's upwards of 600 bills, legislation introduced around the country in various states attacking trans rights. Trans people are under attack. And so what can you do? For me personally, I am very blessed and very lucky to be an attorney with Lambda Legal, but unfortunately that's not everyone's option. And so how can you get involved? It is important to remember that legislation is impacted by the people who call in and call against it and fight against it. People can submit comments to legislation during a legislative session and get on the record the violence that the state commits and will commit when they pass legislation that is so harmful to people in different communities. I think something that has been unfortunately successful for folks in power in the United States is dividing us. People think that the rights of transgender people don't have anything to do with the rights of cisgender people, or that the rights of Black Americans have nothing to do with the rights of LGBTQ people. And when you look at the history of criminalization and the history of laws in our country, you see that it is the same hate, the same vitriol, and the same language that is used against everyone in order to deny us rights. It's important that we don't focus on specific discrete topics, that we open up and become involved in different movements, that we build connections across movements. We build connections with our neighbors and look in spaces that have maybe less often been spaces to find community and support to identify new partners. In addition to commenting on legislation, people can write amicus briefs. As the senator mentioned, an amicus brief is a written document. Amicus brief is friend of the court. It is for someone who's not party to a case, can submit a brief stating why it is important for a judge to rule in one way or another. I think, again, it is important for us as people who believe in the rights of individuals and human rights to put it on the record why we believe in this and what issues are at stake. It's important for us to get on the record that we do not agree with discrimination and that we believe that the courts need to rule a different way. In addition to amicus briefs, attending protests, writing articles, and just taking to the streets and engaging in both the legal and legislative process. It is our right as individuals to take part in building the world that we want to live in. And with that, time's up, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Whit. You'll see Whit in a few minutes after we get through the next two presentations. And for our next speaker, I'm very pleased to introduce Miriam Mohammed Miller from Planned Parenthood of Greater New York. Miriam, yeah, you could clap for Planned Parenthood. Government relations and policy. She works to drive policy aimed at protecting reproductive freedom in New York State. Please welcome Miriam Mohammed Miller.
I'll hold it like you.
Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much, Senator, for having Planned Parenthood of Greater New York come out and present to you all about the status of sexual and reproductive health care in New York, in ways in which we hope the state legislature and local government leaders can support access to reproductive health care in these troubling times. Again, as the senator mentioned, my name is Miriam Muhammad Miller. I use she, her pronouns, and I work in government relations for Planned Parenthood of Greater New York and have the pleasure of working with the senator and his team on advancing sexual reproductive health care policy. I have a quick presentation for you all, again, talking about the status of sexual reproductive health care. I have an agenda that I will get to with this quicker. So just quickly on some of the items that I'll be talking about today again, I'll actually be starting with a quick overview of Planned Parenthood of Greater New York, talking about the landscape, and then talking about ways in which we can achieve core investments in the reproductive healthcare infrastructure with the anticipated attacks we will see from the federal government. We want to make sure that we're shoring up our providers' ability to provide care. So Planned Parenthood of Greater New York, we sort of are set up as a three-pronged structure. Of course, we're a healthcare provider, providing a full range of reproductive and sexual health services at 4 health centers in New York City, and we have health centers throughout the state. We also have a robust education and outreach part of the house where we have folks go out into the community, making sure they're connecting young people, older folks, families, the LGBTQ community, immigrants to health services in culturally competent ways. And then we have an advocacy wing that I sit in where we mobilize the community to fight, whether it's legislatively, through social media in their communities, fight for their right to access care. And as I mentioned, we're, I didn't mention this, but we're the largest Planned Parenthood affiliate in New York State. There's 5 affiliates, and we were founded in 1916 in New York, in Brooklyn. And again, we offer education programs, healthcare, advocacy throughout these regions in New York. We offer services and operate health centers in the Southern Finger Lakes, in Hudson Valley, New York City, and in Nassau County. And this is just a list of some of the services that we offer, everything from contraceptive care to cancer screenings, general gynecological care, abortion care, of course, transgender and gender non-conforming healthcare services, vasectomies, and we support individuals with enrolling in public health insurance programs. And then this is just a list of some of our education and outreach programs, again, targeting young people, targeting families, offering our information in the high schools and middle schools. We have a Parenthood de Salud program that targets Spanish-speaking individuals, and bystander intervention trainings. That's some of our clinic escort work that we do, helping usher folks into our health centers who are, sometimes harassed by anti-abortion protesters, which we train a lot of folks to, make sure that they're safely allowing people into our health centers. So I'll go into just where we are as a state. I will start with saying that New York, as many folks know, is kind of the beginning of the women's rights movement, kind of a core place for the fight for reproductive rights. We created protections for abortion care and access for abortion care even before Roe, a year before Roe. So we have been seen as a haven for many years and for many people to access reproductive health care, specifically abortion care. And over the last few years, thanks to having a pro-sexual reproductive health care rights and justice state legislature, the senator has been core in passing legislation, again, to ensure the legal right to abortion in our state. And these are just some of the key policies that were passed in the last few years since the fall of Roe. We were able to achieve a number of legal victories, again, to safeguard access, policies like protecting patients and providers. Just in the last few weeks, there were bills that were passed in the Senate and the Assembly to protect providers from persecution from states hostile to abortion care. We expanded protections for the LGBTQ community, LGBTQIA plus community. We have worked with the legislature to secure funding for reproductive and sexual health care. We passed the Equal Rights Amendment last year, which is really, really exciting. I think thanks everyone in the community updating our state constitution to make sure that folks had legal pathways to protect themselves when they're being discriminated from accessing services, no matter their gender, age, their pregnancy status. That was a really core advocacy moment for the movement. So really appreciate, again, folks who supported and voted for the Equal Rights Amendment. We also saw some policies in support of holding crisis pregnancy centers accountable to some degree. And to folks who are unfamiliar with crisis pregnancy centers, they are essentially fake health centers that pop up near real reproductive health care centers. And their goal is to dissuade, shame, and force people away from accessing legitimate care. We saw some policies on the state level and the local level, again, to move closer to holding them accountable. Is a really complex issue, but we saw some advancements there. We saw expansion to access, expanding access to contraceptive care, and saw XRH care being expanded to young people on SUNY and CUNY campuses. So again, we've seen a lot of victories for access to reproductive health care. But there is a lot of work to be done, and that brings me to work in the movement right now to shore up investments in the reproductive healthcare ecosystem in our state. We know that we have a lot of work to do on continuing to ensure the legal right to access, but we want to make sure that folks are aware that we need core investments, funding, supporting providers, bolstering the infrastructure, especially now when we have a federal government who daily is putting something out into the public discourse about dismantling our rights. We want to make sure that health centers can stay open, health centers have the funding to continue their operations, keep staff on board, to do this really, really important work. So we have some key policies that I'll talk to you today about that we believe will shore up access. And it's not a full list, there's still a lot, but there's some key things that we think legislative leaders can focus on in this fiscal year. And before I talk about that, I just wanted to highlight some of the executive orders from the Trump administration that we have already seen impacting access to not only sexual and reproductive health care, but many marginalized communities throughout the country. We've seen orders rolling back DEI programs. We've seen orders removing some key protections that the Biden administration enacted when that administration came into office. We've seen recently attacks on transgender and gender nonconforming and binary individuals where the federal government is only recognizing two genders. We've seen funding being stripped from providers offering gender affirming care. We've seen executive orders on ICE enforcement, how harmful that has been to communities throughout our state. We saw a lot in the last few weeks attempts to freeze federal funding for public programs, even though that was kind of, they went back and forth on that. Just the cooling effect and the fear that put into many, many providers that depend on critical funding from the federal government. And then recently we saw the Trump administration pardon January 6 people and also individuals who violated the FACE Act. And just a little bit about that, the FACE Act is a law that in many ways allows individuals to safely access reproductive health care. The goal is to allow them to do so without harassment. And if there are people who are harassing patients coming into reproductive health centers, there's state and federal laws and a local law in New York City that offers some protections to people. But we saw the Trump administration on the same day he pardoned January 6th. I feel like protesters are soft, but those people, we saw him pardon 23 people who violated the FACE Act. Some of those people have showed up at Planned Parenthood of Greater New York health centers, actually violently harassing patients and some of our staff. So really scary times, and we anticipate anti-abortion protesters being more emboldened to come out and protest now that they have some level of protection from the federal government. So those are some things that we're looking out for. And just wanted to provide that context as to why it's really, really important to invest, to provide critical investments in the reproductive healthcare ecosystem. So I have 3 items that I wanted to highlight today. Again, this is not an exhaustive list. There's many, many things that we are hoping that our elected leaders can focus on. The first of which is investing dollars into reproductive healthcare providers. So we are thankful to have a state legislature, have a governor commit funding over the last few years, really since the fall of Roe, providing funding directly to providers to expand access. In 2020, the governor released the first round of funding, which is $25 million. But what we saw is that most of that funding went into shore up how operations we're currently running. So we are hoping for new investments, the first of which is $20 million in grant funding to help address some of the stagnant Medicaid reimbursement rates for medication abortion care. Abortion providers, over 60% of abortion providers provide medication abortion care, but the reimbursement rate for this service is very low compared to other states. In New York, we're reimbursing at around $245 per visit, where other states are, like California and Oregon, are reimbursing at about $1,100 per visit. So that gap has really, the rising cost of healthcare, stagnant Medicaid reimbursements have created a gap for many providers throughout our state, not just Planned Parenthood. And so we're hoping that this flexible grant funding will allow providers to supplement funding loss, but also really be able to expand care. And also $15 million, this is investments we've gotten from the state government for, since the fall of Roe as well, to help with capital improvements, keep operations flowing, but also modernize security capacities at health centers. We are also looking to our state electeds to end mandatory reporting. As you know, states hostile to abortion care, the federal government, they are looking for any way to criminalize people in our state, living outside of our state, getting abortion care. Just recently, there was a warrant for an arrest of a provider in the Hudson Valley, one of Planned Parenthood of Greater New York's providers, actually. It was a warrant for their arrest because they provided abortion care to someone in Louisiana. So we know this information, the mandatory reporting, things right now that providers are required to provide in the state are like filling out triplicate sheets, providing someone's social security number. We want to reduce the amount of information that is going out into the systems so that that can't be pulled to use to criminalize individuals. And then we're asking or looking to have an expansion of the reproductive freedom and equity program. Again, this was funding from the governor and the state legislature that was put into the budget for the last few years in response to the fall of Roe. This funding has been critical again to keep operations moving and flowing, helping individuals live in New York, helping individuals forced to travel here for sexual and reproductive health care. Want to continue this funding, but increase this funding because now in the last year, this funding has been expanded to abortion funds, which are organizations set up independently from providers to help individuals in the state, coming from other places throughout the country, secure care, helping with travel needs, paying for services, childcare, loss of wages, really important partners in this movement, again, to help those who are in need. So we're asking for increased funding in this space. And to do all that work, we need people power It's been really critical to ensure that the stories of those impacted by any ban, any limited service, who have had a positive impact from a provider, tell their stories in this movement. So I just wanted to connect folks to our advocacy programs. We have programs specifically for Spanish-speaking communities, college students, young people. We have a number of programs that allow people to connect with whatever they identify with in whatever way in this movement. So if you scan the QR code, you can learn more about our advocacy work. Or if you don't have QR code capabilities, our website is Planned Parenthood of Greater New York. So visit us anytime. And if you have any questions about our policy work, advocacy work, the status of the reproductive healthcare ecosystem, I'm happy to talk to folks anytime. So yeah, feel free to reach out to me, and I'm looking forward to answering questions and connecting with you all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mary. Let's give it up again for Mary. Greater New York guys. Wanted to acknowledge our council member Gail Brewer is here. Next, we're going to hear from Perry Grossman. Perry is the director of the Voting Rights Project at the New York Civil Liberties Union. He is a supervising attorney whose work focuses primarily on litigation and advocacy efforts concerning voting rights and election law issues. This is important. During his time at the NYCLU, he has successfully argued in cases to stop the Trump administration from putting a citizenship question on the 2020 census. Round of applause for that. Undocumented immigrants from congressional apportionment. Round of applause for that. As well as preventing the disenfranchisement of 127,000 voters in Harris County, Texas in the 2020 election. A round of applause for that. Welcome, Perry Grossman. Perry. Thank you so much.
It's such a pleasure to see all of you. I was scrambling down here late because I was working on a TRO against the prison system over a thing that is not my usual bailiwick, but I appreciate everyone's patience with me. I get a lot of questions about what does voting rights work look like in New York, right? New York works fine. Why aren't you in Alabama? Why aren't you in Texas? Why aren't you in, everywhere else where there is this sort of constant rollback of voting rights? And the answer is, if we're not doing it right here, if we're not doing as best as it can possibly done here, then how can we expect other places to do well? And it wasn't that long ago that New York State had some of the most restrictive voting laws in the country. Prior to January 2019, 95%, maybe more, of all votes cast in the previous 100 years were cast in person on election day, right? And what we've seen over the past several years is the massive expansion of opportunities to vote and lowering the cost of voting in New York State. We were, I think, 36, 37 to have early voting, I think 38 to have online registration, but we caught up really, really fast. And now, now we're starting to get into the good stuff. We've got automatic voter registration. It's not quite stood up yet, but keep the pressure on, we'll get there. The DMV will eventually figure out what it's doing after it gets to the third hour of this line. We do have electronic poll books. We have no excuse absentee early voting, which is really nice. So we've made all that progress. And so while you're seeing the SAVE Act at the federal level, right? I'm sure there'll be questions about that. I don't work that much on federal legislation. That's my national colleagues, but obviously everybody has questions about that. But while we see that rollback, while we see voter ID laws, documentary proof of citizenship laws, rollbacks on early voting, the line warming ban in places like Georgia, you name it. we're going in the other direction. If we don't keep going the other direction, the vote suppressors shift the frame of reference. So right now, when democracy as is under threat, as it has been in anyone's lifetime in this room, it is so critical that we in New York keep pushing in the right direction. And so in addition to those states, not all in the South, not all in the West, certainly we've got some northern Midwestern states that do some terrible things, but those states, a federal government that seems chaotic but hell-bent on destroying democracy and suppressing votes, and a Supreme Court that has made its project squeezing the Voting Rights Act into as little as humanly possible. It's so important that New York and California, Maryland and Illinois, Connecticut, all these places really keep pushing back hard. And so one of the things I want to mention in particular is what I think is one of New York's recent and most important achievements in this moment. Because not only are we seeing the rollback of sort of the nuts and bolts of democracy, not only are we seeing vote suppression, but we're also seeing, the massive backlash to the gains of the civil rights movement and an effort to extinguish, not just the concepts of diversity, equity, and inclusion, but to really remove whole swaths of our community from public life. One of the things I'm most proud of New York doing recently is enacting the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Act. Absolutely worth the applause. It is really the first of the comprehensive state voting rights acts. It takes what California did 20 years ago with a really small but narrow and important state voting rights act. And after Shelby County and after Brnovich and after Cooper v. Harris, all these cases which are trying to squeeze the Voting Rights Act into nothing, New York said, how can we learn from the last 50, 60 years of voting rights cases, of democracy, how things have functioned? How can we build a Voting Rights Act for the modern era? And so we have the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Act in New York. We learned the lessons of history and we made our best efforts to do better. So really, really excited about that. We just litigated the first successful case. It was a racial vote dilution case against Nassau County, the Nassau County legislature. That county is about, you all know it well, you live right next to it. About 44% people of color. It's a 19-member county legislature. And they cracked and packed people of color into 4 majority minority seats out of 19. They said for the first time ever, they were going to ignore the protections of the Federal Voting Rights Act. And so we went into New York State Court and we brought the first ever redistricting case under a state voting rights act. And today I'm happy to say the Nassau County legislature is going to have 6 majority minority districts, as well as the first Asian influence district created in a redistricting plan under a state voting rights act. And people of color in Nassau County are going to go from being marginalized in the minority of the minority caucus to having a chance to be the majority of the majority caucus. The Supreme Court has made the great gem of the most effective civil rights law in history, right? The Voting Rights Act of 1965 is really one of the crowning achievements of the civil rights movement. But even within that, Section 5 pre-clearance of the Voting Rights Act is the crown jewel there. And so, I know where I am. I went to elementary school a block from here. My mother lives a few blocks away, so I know I have a well-informed erudite audience. We know what happened after Shelby County, the retrenchment of so many terrible voting laws. And we really came to understand just how critically important pre-clearance was. And 3 counties in New York State were covered under federal pre-clearance, including Manhattan, right? So what did New York do? In the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Act of New York, we have the first state pre-clearance regime, and other states are following suit. And I'm so proud to say there's now a Connecticut Voting Rights Act, there's a Minnesota Voting Rights Act, the New Jersey and Michigan Voting Rights Act have been introduced, and we are being that leader. So when people come to me and they say, you know, why do you do voting rights work in New York? You know, you're not gonna change Alabama tomorrow, you're not gonna change Texas and Florida tomorrow. I said, no, but I can change New Jersey tomorrow. If we get New Jersey, we can get Delaware. If we get New Jersey and Delaware, maybe we can get Pennsylvania. Virginia has a state voting rights act. It's a weak one, but we'll make it a good one. We're starting in really good places. So the thing that is most important when we're considering voting rights in this really critical and perilous time in our democracy is what can we as New Yorkers do? Right? You know, our democracy, it's not perfect. It's in good shape. I'm really proud of what we've done as a state. I know we can do more and we can do better. And we'll talk about that at every conference. You'll have fantastic questions. But you know, we need to keep pushing forward. We need to keep being that loud and powerful voice for the best democracy that everybody in the United States deserves. Even if we don't like them very much, they deserve, right? They deserve a great democracy. And so, you know, I want you to think about democracy, and I'm here to primarily answer questions about voting and elections. It's my thing. It's what I litigate. It's what I do policy work on. It's what I get to do, you know, great things like we're doing out here. You know, but you know, it's not just going to the ballot box, or hopefully the drop box one day, or putting your ballot in the mail. I want you to think about democracy in so many different ways, about getting out of the street and protesting, about jury service. Really can't tell you how important jury service is. And by the way, New York has a lifetime permanent ban on jury service by people with felony convictions. Florida doesn't have that. North Dakota, Indiana, deep red states, automatic restoration on release. Places that we might think of as more ideological peers, Vermont, Maine, District of Columbia, you never lose your right to serve on a jury. Jury service is a form of voting too. What do juries do? They vote, right? In fact, the vote dilution that occurs in the jury box with the lack of diversity we have there, it matters so much. In an election, let me tell you, if there's 150 million people voting in a presidential election, your vote matters. I will go down to the wire to tell you that your vote matters. You got to get out there and vote. But when you're one of 12 on a jury, one of 23 on a grand jury, I mean, I just can't tell you how important that is. The jury box is the way we hold the administration of the law accountable, right? The same way we hold our elected officials accountable at the ballot box. So please, 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 I know when I have conversations about jury service, it's mostly, yeah, I really want to figure out how to get out of that because I'm busy. But please think about how you serve, how you get your neighbors to serve. How do we think about, in this critical moment, every form of democratic participation that we can possibly exercise to bring ourselves from this very dark place right at the moment to a better, brighter place, because we can come out on the other side. We should be the leaders that get us there, and we've got the good stuff to do it here in New York. And so, you know, I may have a lot more time. If I do, I'll hopefully save it for your questions and all that. But I want to talk to you for a second about the importance of integrated advocacy, right? I know a lot of really, really wonderful, very, very busy and underpaid public interest lawyers. They're great. I admire what they do so much. Litigation, you know, Brad mentioned that I worked on a citizenship case. There's a very cute moment if you see the movie The Fight on Hulu, where my colleague who actually did a lot more work than I did, Dale Ho, currently on the federal bench, where we figured out after reading a really exhausting opinion that we actually won rather than lost, and we hung it out real big. Like, that's a nice moment. Like, that gets a lot of glory. Following around litigators, you know, glamorous. But litigation is only good at stopping the bad thing from happening. Litigation does not make the good thing happen, right? The folks who are running in now, putting in TROs, good for them. It's really, really important, but it's not going to get us to where we need to be all by itself, right? Policy and legislation, really important. These are genuine victories. You know, at the risk of light electioneering, I'm very pleased to have worked on legislation with Brad. I think he's a tremendously valuable public servant, and it really is good to be able to make good laws here in New York State. But that's just the construct, right? Good laws sitting on the books by themselves are not going to get us a great and healthy democracy. It is the organizing, it is the public education, it is all of you that make for a great democracy. We can have all the litigation wins we want, we can make all the great policy in the world. If you are not getting to the ballot box, bringing your family, your friends, your neighbors to the ballot box, getting out into the streets when we need to get out into the streets, getting into the jury box, you know, letting your voice be heard at a time when a lot of people would like you to shut up, don't do it. Be that loud, obnoxious New Yorker that you are. That is the democracy you can afford. Let's give another round of applause.
Join us on the stage. Perry, I wanted you to know this, that I have a bill that passed through the Senate Judiciary Committee to raise jury service from the daily pay of $40 to $72. We need it. So I wanted to know if the council member wanted to say something. Okay, thank you. She's amazing. And now we're going to, our colleagues are going to be passing around the mic to take your questions. I'm going to start though, if that's okay, with the first question, which is, thank you for your presentations. They were amazing. And it gives me, yeah. It gives me a lot of hope that you're there in the trenches as we toil away in Albany or City Hall or Washington to try to protect New York. What keeps you up at night? Like, what is the single issue that we should be focused on as we persevere? Let's start with me.
I don't know if there's a single issue. I think that's probably what keeps me up at night is that things are so intersected, and to see, you know, people who are totally against supporting communities that have been historically marginalized, and are like okay with it. Just like, yeah, I'm gonna get up and ruin people's lives because I can. I think that's like the thing that really keeps me up. And then also people in my community and my family that in some ways buy into it. And really having to navigate tough conversations with people that I love. So yeah, I would definitely see that.
Wait.
I think the issue that keeps me up at night is sort of like the lack of human rights framework, the lack of human rights law that is grounded in the United States. Civil rights is important, voting rights is important, but if you stop at civil rights, someone has to say whether or not you're a citizen. And when you have individuals who wake up and their goal is to hate, you've already lost out on a bunch of people having access to the needs that every human has a right to because they exist. And so to me, what keeps me up at night is that we do not have a human rights framework within our law and the international bodies that might impose that on us, we've isolated ourselves from.
Can't top those two. It's fabulous presentation. Thank you so much. So I'll be a little more concrete, but this is the thing that keeps me up at night recently is Eric Adams. And you know, the mayor of the city of New York, based on a letter that probably all of us have read, his lawyers asked the Justice Department to effectively suspend his criminal indictment in exchange for letting the Trump administration run roughshod over New Yorkers and terrorize our streets. And Eric Adams is still mayor. Because I can't imagine a more anti-democratic, corrupt bargain than having a mayor in that position in this city right now. And when I'm going to say, and this was the first statement she made, not the second statement she made. The first statement was that it was anti-democratic to remove Eric Adams. The Democratic theorist in me says, well, no, the people of the state of New York ratified the Constitution of the state of New York, ratified the New York City Charter, giving you, among other people, the responsibility to remove a mayor who is irreparably compromised from doing their job. And so I've given a lot of thought to this recently, knowing that the governor won't act. I really, really hope that the city of New York does what it is enabled to do under the charter, which is start by holding hearings, start by investigating. Because we have this letter which suggests that some really, really terrible things have happened. And the mayor that is sitting in office is not the mayor that was he was democratically elected insofar as we held a free and fair election, but someone who was that compromised is unable. So my hope is that we will see New York City take this important moment to stand up to the Trump administration, stand up to a corrupt mayor and make that.
Not for nothing, Albany has subpoena power too. And, asking the mayor under oath if there was a deal made, I think is a very fair question.
I think that's right. And I would say, first of all, there are eyewitnesses in the room, but also, if we take a historical precedent, right? Jimmy Walker, had the Seabury Commission, right? There needs to be fact finding. There needs to be, investigation. I think there's a place for either Albany or New York City to do it, but the investigation needs to be done. The inquiry needs to happen because we can't simply shrug our shoulders at this kind of affront to the voters.
Thank you. You have a microphone, I think you'll pass around, raise your hand if you have a question. This woman raising right there, you go. And keep your question short because we're short on time, so thank you.
Thank
If
you.
you could state your name, thanks so much.
My name is Andrea, and I'm very concerned about the fact that everybody in the butts in the chairs here were all the frogs in the boiling water. And that feels very limiting as far as what it is we can do. I have a question about in each of your organizations, what you can do or how can we help you when you have so many important people resigning in protest, and who is now taking over, if at all, those jobs? That's question A. And question B is, I was told at the age of 65 that I didn't have to be a juror anymore, even though I wanted to. Is that a thing? And how do I fix that? Thank you.
Good question. Wait, do you want to start with, I think the question is, what can we do as everyday New Yorkers to support your efforts?
As everyday New Yorkers, when we talk about federal regulations, when we talk about federal agencies, there's a commenting period, and people are free to write in to say, this does not align with the country that I live in. This does not align with my values. This does not align with what I understand our Constitution to guarantee. And so you can write in to get on the record that you're disagreeing with it. Similarly with legislation,
on the federal or the state level. Often there are periods where you can testify, you can provide written testimony, you can testify in person. Again, this is an opportunity for you to have your voice heard. And what I think is most important about both the regulatory commenting opportunity and both the legislative commenting opportunity is that it's important that, you know, 50 years in the future, your protest is on the record, that there are future legal scholars, there are future practitioners who can point to the facts that there was a disconnect between what the government did and what the people actually wanted. And I think it's important for us to memorialize that on the official record.
Planned Parenthood brought up how many people to Albany this past week?
400 people.
Your point, the importance of storytelling. I think that's something that's been so critical in movement spaces, especially in a time where misinformation is so amplified. Like people are literally lying, like getting up on the internet and just will lie. Like I had a personal story, I'm gonna leave it. But yeah, it's just, you know, I think what has been helpful with like our annual day of action where we brought up people from throughout the state to Albany, is just creating a space for folks to tell their story. Why is this issue important to me? Why is it important to my family? And because it's important to me, it needs to be important to you. And just really moving people in leadership to align with your beliefs. Even if it's not fully, even if it's for the movement, even if it's fleeting, they need to know why it's important to you, and that's by promoting our stories.
You know, a note on, you know, news and the unreliability of it. We're trying to advance in Albany a budget bill, $30 million to help save National Public Radio here in New York. Harry, on the last part of
Yes.
the question
I
about,
got you.
yeah,
So, quick caveat before that, everything I said about Eric Adams is me as a New York voter and not me as NYCLU, but all very true. So
that is a scrolling across.
Yes,
the screen as we speak.
as long as vote. There's no limit on age for voting, and I frankly, what we're talking about, put on jury service. And the core qualifications to serve as a juror in New York State, you go look at New York Judiciary Law, Section 510, is you have to be a United States citizen, 18 years of age, not having been convicted of a felony, which we are suing over here in Manhattan, and trying to change it in Albany, and you have to be able to read and communicate in English, which is a complicated qualification, but that's it. Those are the 4 qualifications. If you are all of those things, you should be called to jury service. You should sit for voir dire like everybody else. You know, check for your impermissible biases, and otherwise, if you're to be fair and impartial, sit and do that important civic responsibility. So that's certainly an important thing you can do. And just to give a very, very fast answer to the other question, it is don't be overwhelmed by the moment, because there's always something you can do. When, you know, you see the news coming out of Washington, and, you know, I would show you my texts from my brother, but they were just profane. From this afternoon, I haven't even read the news yet. I just know it.
Oh, boy, it's
Yeah.
busy.
But in a moment like that, you know, it's so important to think about, like, there's so many things we can do here right now on an interpersonal level, right? So going for the Albany Day of Action is a great thing to do. Calling your legislator about things that are important. By the way, calling your legislator to say thank you sometimes is also very good. But really look for those small opportunities. Happy to talk later about, you know, discrete opportunities with NYCLU and all that. But it is all of those actions that add up so big. So please do not try to hit grand slams with every swing. Nobody has ever successfully done it. The singles were good.
Another question, do we have, where's the microphone? Okay, so, wait, I think we've got one right here. Is there someone with a question? Oh, here. Oh, right here, okay, oh, sorry. Oh, yeah, there, thank you so much.
I just want to say that, I have been voting and serving on jury duties since I was able to. When I first was called on jury duty, and I can tell you it was way, way back then, I had an option as a woman to not serve. I mean, that was such an insult to me to read that. And the same thing with age. I just served, I didn't get picked, but I've served on like 6 or 7 juries, and it's a wonderful, wonderful experience. It really is, and I work for the Board of Elections on Election Day. There are so many things we can all do that may not look like we're pushing against what the status quo, but it really is. Just volunteer, get out there and do something for someone else.
Thank you.
Excuse me, I know that was a.
No, that's a really good point. And then a question, the woman over, thank you so much.
So I, like most people here, I want to do something, but I don't know what to do and I'm not aware of everything.
Right.
If I donate to each of your organizations, will you let me know what I can do?
We'll let you know anyway, please don't.
So we will send out to every attendee, information about how to get in touch with these organizations and how you can support them with your, resources, however they, may be constituted.
If you tell me if you subscribe to all the organizations, you call your congressman, or there's a this, there's a that. You'll do that for me?
Yes, we will. I'm sure they'll be happy to. Thank you. A question over here.
Hi, 2 questions. First, why don't we, like other countries, mandate voting and find people who don't vote? So that's the first question. Second question.
Which countries do that? I know Australia does.
Brazil, I believe.
Yeah. And second question, even tougher. So Texas had that plan to divide their state into 8 separate states. They never did it. So why doesn't New York divide the states and increase our federal representation?
Right.
Anyway.
The first question is one I've answered before. And the reason that we don't mandate voting, is, there's a number of reasons.
Because more Democrats would be elected?
Well, we don't compel participation because democracy is a voluntary exercise, right? It is one that is a matter of ownership. It's also your right not to exercise ownership. If you don't want to go to the polls, if you feel like the democracy is not one that you want to participate in, you're entitled here to not go. The other problem is if we start mandating voting and then impose penalties, that is going to always fall hardest on the people at the hardest time getting to the polls. And those are always right. So when I talked about the cost of voting before, right? The thing that made New York a difficult place to vote is, we had the longest election day hours in the country, did that one day, right? And you had to have a good cause and like childcare responsibilities. That wasn't a good cause. All kinds of, you work a couple jobs, you commute a long way. Like these are not, you weren't able to get an absentee ballot. And so the cost of voting always falls hardest on the people who can bear it the least. And so if we put a literal cost on that, those are the voters you're gonna end up finding. And I think the best thing we can do is what we've been doing and should continue doing, which is to make the cost of voting as low as possible, but also make information as freely available, because that's another important thing that lowers the cost of voting and helps people make the best choices.
Yeah, and I wanted to follow up on the voting question because of Whit's presentation. What is your assessment of the presidential election and trans rights? Look, the truth is a lot of my colleagues in Albany, not so many in New York City, but now they're wary of trans rights because they saw what happened because of the they-them commercial that ran during NFL games. What's the truth on that?
The truth is, it is easy to blame 2% of the population for issues that have been systemically created by the top 1% of the population. It is easy to avoid accountability and justice in a country where accountability and justice for so many centuries has been avoided. If the US cannot address and account for enslaving Black Americans, if it cannot account for committing genocide against Native Americans, there's always going to need to be a scapegoat to blame the like nightmare that we live in, sort of on. And you know, I think people like to talk about trans rights as if it's a safety issue to women, or talking about women's sports. All of a sudden, all these people love women's sports. You hate women and you hate women's sports. I think they're, and, you know, and that is part of accountability. Like, when we look at sexual violence legislation around the country, like that is the 90s, the idea of consent, the idea there are still some states where women can't say that they were sexually assaulted by their husbands. I think that, you know, people are really happy to get behind women's rights when it's about discriminating against trans people, but I think it is our duty as citizens to push forward about what our rights are and what is safety for us and how do we balance the safety of individuals in the country.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. I think that's part of why we are where we are right now, because we saw leaders retreat from the issue and not face it head on when it was ripe for opportunity to say, actually, this is the truth about, you know, what's happening to trans people. And I'm gonna sit in this truth and I'm gonna communicate it out so that we can dispel the misinformation that contributed to the loss in the election for folks. So, yeah.
Well, you know, I have to thank the abortion rights advocates for Planned Parenthood, mainly, for writing the abortion rights shield law, which we modeled to make certain that we had the gender affirming shield law. So it's so fascinating that those issues are now aligned. A question here.
It's kind of a question, just kind of.
Oh, sorry. Where is it?
Sorry.
Oh, there you go. What's your name? Thank you.
My name is Saul Dennis, and
Thank you, Saul.
it's for you, but really, Paul, when we look at what's going on with the Trump administration, that it seems to be war by other means. It seems to be politics used as a kind of legislative violence. And I wonder if the folks in Albany, and this is a state we control, Democrats control, have ever thought, is there a way to go on the offensive, to bring this war of legislation and legal to Washington? Can we hold back all of our federal taxes, like the governor of Maine said? And I think you have to be honest, it is a fight. It is an existential fight. Can we bring this fight to Washington, in which, and gentlemen, I apologize, I don't remember your name, the ACLU, in which you said, yes, but I can change Delaware and I can change New Jersey. Can New York become the crucible, as she has been historically, for progressive ideas, for the New Deal, for all kinds of things? Can we begin to grow a kind of confederacy of decency? You know, we forget that separate countries in the United States. Is there a way that we can come to the nucleus? How can regular, just folks like us help take this fight? Because chanting outside New York building seems a little silly. All of us want Elon Musk to go. I would want to consider a way to be more vigorous, more vital, more in your face, and frankly, up to the line of legality, and then lean over it.
Yeah. I'm looking right now into whether a state like New York could apply for membership in the World Health Organization. According to the Paris Climate Accord. We have this
Oh. New York during the world.
No, can, the gentleman's question about,
Sorry, so the answer is absolutely we can have a confederacy of decency here, and I think we have been making a lot of strides, but please, and I love New York, I'm a fifth generation New Yorker, my son is the sixth generation of my family to live in the Bronx. I realize we live upstate, but you know. I understand the state a little bit differently, do not give us too much credit. Like, you'd be surprised what some of your neighbors think. You'd be surprised, like, it wasn't, you don't have to drive to the Canadian border to find the deeply offensive Save Girls sports posters, right? Like, that's northern Westchester, you know, like, that's just over the Queens, but part of Queens, right? Like, parts of Queens, like, so, really what we do here and the people we talk to and creating the climate that celebrates diversity, right? Making Manhattan, making New York City a place that is not simply, you know. When you were talking about like these people in women's sports, also everyone loves women's sports. Like why not be the place that like not just tolerates trans people, but embraces, celebrates everything? When they take trans people off of the Stonewall Monument, we gotta be back out there saying, don't forget Marsha P. Johnson, right? Like, get out there, and louder and more embracing of everything. And it'll piss them off elsewhere. And that's what we're really good at.
yeah, and you know, you're right to point out different parts of the state have definitely different opinions. I'll note that there is a bipartisan legislative pro-choice caucus in Albany called bipartisan. We don't have any Republicans as members. Should we change the name there?
There's been conversations about, you know, what the realities of that space has been and just the disappointment for like historically where reproductive rights has been in New York. I think a lot of folks know the story about legalizing abortion in New York. It was a Republican who cast the winning vote to enshrine protections in New York State for abortion care, and to see where we've gone in the last 50 years is really disappointing. But yeah, there have been conversations around kind of reshaping that space and, you know, working with who's gonna work with us. I think we're at the point in this movement where we're gonna have to like leave some folks where they are. If you can't move them, if you can't change hearts and minds in the ways that we need to do the work, we're gonna have to pick up who's with us, pick up those who need our support and do the work with those people and for those people.
We have time for one more question and I'll let they present the, okay, there you go, right there. Thank you.
This is kind of follow-up to what the gentleman said above, and I don't know how much of this is a question, but you talked about making small changes, and I generally agree with that. But what's happening right now is huge, and it's gonna continue to get worse. So we can't operate in the same way that we've been operating. When you say get out, even if we somehow got more marches going, that's not going to change anything. So I'm sorry, I know about the small changes, I know. But when you talk about maybe going more on the offensive and things you talked about, Brad, building up, I think our thinking has to go larger and more in that direction. And there's we the people, and there are you the people, and we have to work more together, maybe more town halls, for example, to have more discussions like this. This was so important to me to come here today.
That's a really nice and closing comment to our panel. Would you like to conclude with your own words?
Sure. I want to first thank you, Senator, for having Planned Parenthood of Greater New York speak in this space, and thanks everyone for coming out and listening. I think I'll, you know, just reiterate ways that folks can get involved. I'm happy to share that information again, but I think what's really important for this iteration of the movement, whether it be voting rights, the rights for the LGBTQ community, reproductive rights in general is just gonna be people power. I think that's kind of got lost in the last election, the importance of people and their narratives. And so we just want to make sure that we're emphasizing that in this moment. So definitely want to work with folks who are supportive of this work and moving it forward, so.
I think what I appreciate that you talked about is decreasing the cost of voting. And I think that, you know, folks are excited to get out and protest. People are excited to call legislators, but there are people, you're gonna walk outside right now and you're gonna see a bunch of people who don't have homes, a bunch of people who don't have food. And how are you being thoughtful and intentional about redistributing economic resources, hard resources? Because it is when people have that like human security, that security in that all their needs met, that you're able to build the movement and build community and really move forward with it. So I think that in addition to this idea of protesting, we really need to be thoughtful and intentional about the ways we are engaging economically in the negative place that we are in the US right now.
I think that's a great point. I really want to take off on that and sort of address the very thoughtful remark at the end as well. You know, part of what we do, you know, my great-great-grandfather's naturalization certificate is from Rostov, Russia. I took a boat from Hamburg. He lived at 3828 White Plains Road. And part of the reason he came here is because this is a very special and welcoming place. And they let him off the boat and they lived here and we're doing pretty good, you know? And this is not a friendly world at this particular moment. It's not a friendly country. It's really, really important to us right now and here to do better all the time. And this, I don't mean this to be too touchy-feely thing, but you know, every small thing you do, right? There are unhoused people outside right now. Like, if we are not making New York City the best, a shining example to the entire rest of the country, if we are not standing up for all of the things that we need to be standing up for here to make this a good and decent and equitable place, and I'm just so overfilled with pride to have grown up here, to live here, all these things. But we can do a lot. We can do so much. So yes, it's important to know what's going on in the world. Yes, it's important to know what's going on in the country. There's so many very, very big things, but we also do a lot to affect those big things by making this, you know, the beacon it could be, sort of has been to some extent for a long time.
Thank you, thank you. Non-binary and transgender rights project. Thank you all. Have a great weekend. Thank you very much.